Baby Triceratops gets lost. Then a T-Rex does the most unexpected thing. How will this story unfold? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. The prehistoric jungle buzzed with life, its dense greenery swaying under the gentle rhythm of a warm breeze. Towering trees formed a canopy above, letting sunlight dapple the forest floor where ancient ferns grew in abundance. The air was thick with the calls of distant dinosaurs and the hum of insects. Near a calm watering hole, a herd of Triceratops moved with deliberate care. Adults grazed on the low vegetation, their massive horns gleaming in the sunlight, while their young stayed close, shielded by their formidable parents. Among the herd was Toro, a baby Triceratops with an unusually curious nature. His small but sturdy legs moved restlessly as he explored the edge of the herd, his bright eyes captivated by every fluttering leaf and buzzing insect. His mother, a vigilant and protective matriarch, called out to him with a low, rumbling sound, urging him to stay near. But Toro was too excited to listen. Something colorful had caught his eye, a patch of vibrant blue flowers swaying gently in the breeze. Entranced, he ventured toward them, his stubby legs carrying him farther from the herd. The flowers seemed to glow in the sunlight, and Toro couldn't resist leaning down to sniff them, his tiny horn brushing against the petals. Minutes passed, and Toro's fascination with the jungle deepened. He wandered farther, chasing after a shimmering dragonfly that flitted just out of reach. The sounds of his herd grew fainter as he pushed through thick ferns, his small cries of excitement blending with the jungle's cacophony. Suddenly, the realization hit him: he was alone. Toro froze, his tiny tail twitching nervously as he looked around. The comforting presence of his mother and the other Triceratops was nowhere to be found. Panic set in, and Toro let out a plaintive wail, his small voice echoing through the trees. Miles away, a very different creature roamed the jungle. Ray's, a towering T-Rex, was on the hunt. His powerful legs crushed the undergrowth beneath him, and his sharp eyes scanned the forest for movement. Known as one of the most fearsome predators in the region, Ray's inspired terror wherever he went. He was a solitary hunter, relying on his strength and cunning to survive in the unforgiving prehistoric landscape. As Ray's prowled, his keen senses detected a sound that piqued his interest, a high-pitched cry, faint but distinct. He paused, his massive head tilting as he listened. It wasn't the sound of a rival predator or a typical prey animal. This was different. Intrigued, Ray's turned toward the source of the noise, his heavy footsteps shaking the ground as he moved. Toro's cries grew louder as he stumbled through the jungle, his small body brushing against towering ferns and tangled vines. He called out for his mother, but the only response was the distant screech of a bird-like creature. Fear gripped him as he realized just how far he had wandered. The jungle, once a place of wonder, now seemed vast and menacing. As Toro pushed through a thicket, he froze. A shadow loomed over him, blocking out the sunlight. Slowly, he turned his head, his wide eyes meeting the massive figure of Ray's. The T-Rex stood motionless, his sharp teeth glinting as he gazed down at the tiny Triceratops. For a moment, the two stared at each other, the jungle silent except for the sound of rustling leaves. Toro's instincts screamed at him to run, but his legs refused to move. He could only watch as the enormous predator lowered his head, sniffing the air. Ray's nostrils flared as he took in the scent of the baby dinosaur. It would have been an easy meal, but something about Toro's small, trembling form made Ray's hesitate. For a long moment, Ray's simply stood there, his golden eyes fixed on the frightened baby. Toro, too scared to even cry, blinked up at him, his tiny chest rising and falling with quick, shallow breaths. Then, as if driven by an instinct he didn't fully understand, Ray's stepped back, his massive foot crushing a patch of undergrowth. Before either of them could react further, a new sound shattered the stillness of the jungle. A series of high-pitched screeches, sharp and menacing. Ray's turned his head sharply, his body tensing. From the shadows emerged a pack of raptors, their sleek, feathered bodies darting through the trees as they closed in on Toro. The baby Triceratops let out a terrified cry, instinctively crouching low to the ground. The raptors, sensing an easy target, moved closer, their razor-sharp claws glinting in the sunlight. But before they could strike, rays let out a deafening roar that echoed through the jungle like thunder. The raptors froze, their predatory confidence wavering as they realized who they were up against. Rays stepped forward, positioning himself between the pack and Toro. His massive jaws parted in another earth-shaking roar, sending the smaller predators scurrying back into the shadows. The jungle fell silent once more, the threat temporarily driven away. Toro peeked out from his hiding spot, his tiny body still trembling. Rays turned to look at him, his expression unreadable. Slowly, the T-Rex lowered his head, his massive snout inches away from the baby dinosaur. Toro sniffled, his fear slowly giving way to curiosity as he realized the giant predator wasn't going to hurt him. With the immediate danger gone, Rays nudged Toro gently with his snout, urging him to stand. The baby Triceratops wobbled to his feet, his wide eyes still fixed on the T-Rex. Rays turned and began to walk, glancing back to make sure Toro was following. Unsure but too scared to stay behind, Toro tottered after him, his small legs struggling to keep up with the predator's long strides. The two unlikely companions moved through the jungle, the stark contrast between them impossible to ignore. Ray's towering frame cast a long shadow over the tiny Triceratops, but he moved with surprising care, making sure not to outpace his new charge. Toro, though still nervous, began to relax as the minutes passed. There was something oddly reassuring about the presence of the massive T-Rex. Their journey was not without its challenges. At one point, Toro stumbled into a patch of thick mud, his small legs sinking into the muck. He let out a distressed cry, struggling to free himself. Rays, watching from a few steps ahead, turned back and carefully reached down with his massive snout. With a gentle push, he helped Toro climb out of the mud, the baby letting out a relieved squeak. Later, as they passed a bubbling stream, Toro hesitated, unsure of how to cross. Rays waded through the water effortlessly, his powerful legs barely noticing the current. When he reached the other side, he turned and let out a low rumble, encouraging Toro to follow. The baby stepped tentatively into the stream, his small legs wobbling as the water splashed around him. With Ray's watchful eyes on him, Toro managed to cross, his confidence growing with each step. As night began to fall, the jungle transformed into a symphony of sounds. Crickets chirped, and the occasional call of a nocturnal predator echoed through the trees. Rays found a small clearing where they could rest, his massive body forming a protective barrier around Toro. The baby Triceratops curled up beside him, his tiny form dwarfed by the T-Rex's imposing frame. For the first time since he had wandered away from his herd, Toro felt safe. He nuzzled against Ray's leg, his eyes closing as exhaustion overtook him. Rays watched the baby for a moment, his golden eyes softening. Despite their differences, an unlikely bond had formed between them, a bond that neither of them fully understood but both instinctively trusted. As the stars filled the sky, Rays let out a low, rumbling sigh. He didn't know why he had chosen to protect the tiny Triceratops, but he couldn't deny the sense of purpose it gave him. For the first time in his solitary existence, he wasn't just a predator, he was a guardian. The night passed peacefully, the jungle blanketed in darkness as a cool breeze rustled the treetops. Toro slept soundly beside Rays, his small body rising and falling with each breath. Rays, on the other hand, remained awake, his sharp eyes scanning the clearing for any signs of danger. Though the baby Triceratops was no longer trembling with fear, Rays knew the jungle was unpredictable, and the scent of such a vulnerable creature could easily attract predators. As dawn broke, the first rays of sunlight pierced through the canopy, illuminating the clearing in soft, golden light. Rays stretched his massive limbs, the ground trembling slightly under his weight. Toro stirred, blinking groggily as he woke to the sight of his towering protector. The baby let out a soft squeak, a sound that seemed more like a greeting than a cry of distress. Reyes tilted his head, his golden eyes meeting Toro's. He let out a low rumble, a sound that seemed to calm the baby. Toro stood on wobbly legs, shaking off the remnants of sleep before nuzzling against Reyes' leg. It was a gesture of trust, one that didn't go unnoticed by the T-Rex. The journey to find Toro's herd resumed with the sun rising higher in the sky. Reyes led the way, his powerful frame moving effortlessly through the dense jungle. Toro trotted behind him, his small legs working hard to keep up. Though the baby still stumbled occasionally, his confidence had grown. He no longer cried out in fear at every unfamiliar sound, trusting that Reyes would protect him. Their path took them through a stretch of jungle where the foliage grew thicker, vines and ferns creating a near-impenetrable wall. Reyes used his powerful tail to clear a path, swatting away the obstacles with ease. Toro followed closely, his wide eyes taking in the sights and sounds of the vibrant jungle. A flock of small, bird-like dinosaurs flitted overhead, their chirps filling the air. As they reached a clearing, Reyes stopped abruptly, his nostrils flaring as he sniffed the air. Toro froze behind him, sensing the change in the T-Rex's demeanor. Reyes let out a low growl, his muscles tensing as he scanned the area. From the shadows, a pair of predatory eyes emerged, followed by a sleek, feathered body. It was a carnivorous dinosaur, smaller than Reyes but still a dangerous predator. The creature's sharp teeth gleamed as it crept closer, its gaze fixed on Toro. Toro whimpered, instinctively backing away, but Reyes stepped in front of him, letting out a deafening roar that echoed through the clearing. The smaller predator hesitated, clearly intimidated by the massive T-Rex. Reyes bared his teeth, his powerful tail lashing the ground as a warning. The predator growled softly, its eyes flicking between Reyes and Toro. For a moment, it seemed to consider its options. Then, with a reluctant snarl, it turned and slinked back into the jungle, disappearing into the undergrowth. Reyes watched the shadows for a moment longer, his body still tense. When he was certain the threat was gone, he turned to Toro, letting out a low rumble as if to reassure him. Toro blinked up at him, his tiny frame trembling slightly, but he quickly nuzzled against Reyes' leg, his trust in the T-Rex unshaken. The encounter served as a reminder of the dangers that lurked in the jungle. Though Reyes was more than capable of protecting Toro, he knew they couldn't afford to linger. The sooner they found the Triceratops herd, the safer the baby would be. As they continued their journey, Reyes' protective instincts grew stronger. He guided Toro carefully through the jungle, teaching him how to navigate the terrain and avoid potential hazards. When they reached a stream, Reyes showed Toro how to drink from the clear water, his massive snout dipping into the cool liquid. Toro watched intently, mimicking Reyes' actions as he took his first tentative sips. The baby let out a delighted squeak, his tail wagging slightly as he discovered the refreshing taste of the water. Reyes rumbled softly, his golden eyes filled with an almost paternal pride. The bond between the unlikely pair deepened as they shared moments of rest and discovery. At one point, they stumbled upon a grove filled with vibrant flowers and strange, glowing fungi. Toro's curiosity got the better of him, and he trotted ahead to explore. Reyes followed closely, his massive frame moving with surprising grace as he kept an eye on the baby. Toro sniffed a cluster of bright red flowers, his tiny horns brushing against the petals. He let out a squeak of delight, clearly fascinated by the vivid colors. Reyes rumbled softly, lowering his head to examine the flowers as well. The sight of the tiny Triceratops playing among the blooms brought an unfamiliar warmth to the T-Rex's chest. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Reyes and Toro found a small clearing where they could rest for the night. Reyes lay down first, his massive body creating a protective barrier around Toro. The baby curled up beside him, his tiny frame dwarfed by the T-Rex's sheer size. The stars emerged one by one, casting a gentle glow over the jungle. Toro shifted slightly, nuzzling closer to Reyes' leg. The T-Rex let out a low, rumbling sigh, his golden eyes scanning the darkened forest. Though he had always been a solitary predator, Reyes found himself cherishing the presence of the tiny creature he had chosen to protect. The following morning, their journey took them to a wide, open plain, a stark contrast to the dense jungle they had traversed. In the distance, a familiar sound reached Toro's ears, the low, rumbling calls of a Triceratops herd. The baby's eyes lit up, and he let out an excited cry, his tiny legs carrying him forward. Reyes followed, his sharp eyes scanning the horizon. The herd came into view, their massive forms grazing peacefully under the morning sun. Toro's cries grew louder, and one of the adults, a large female, lifted her head, her gaze locking onto the tiny figure approaching from the plain. It was Toro's mother. The reunion was both heartwarming and emotional. Toro ran toward his mother, his small cries echoing across the plain. The female Triceratops moved swiftly to meet him, nuzzling him gently as he reached her side. The rest of the herd gathered around, their eyes filled with curiosity as they watched the tiny baby reunite with his family. Reyes hung back, his towering frame partially hidden by a cluster of trees. He watched the reunion silently, a strange mix of emotions stirring within him. He had completed his task. Toro was safe, back where he belonged. But the bond they had formed made it difficult to walk away. Toro, now safely nestled against his mother, turned to look back at Reyes. The baby let out a soft cry, his eyes pleading as if asking the T-Rex to stay. Reyes rumbled softly, his golden eyes meeting Toro's. The herd, wary of the massive predator, began to shift uneasily. Toro's mother, however, seemed to understand. She looked at Reyes, her gaze filled with both gratitude and caution. With a low, rumbling call, she acknowledged the T-Rex before leading Toro back toward the safety of the herd. Reyes watched them disappear into the distance, his heart heavy but full. He had done what he set out to do, protected the baby and ensured his safety. As the morning sun rose higher in the sky, Reyes turned back toward the jungle, his massive frame moving with purpose. Though he would return to his solitary life, Reyes carried with him the memory of the tiny Triceratops who had taught him the value of connection and the power of compassion. Reyes stood at the edge of the plain, watching the herd disappear into the distance. The sight of Toro, safely reunited with his mother, should have brought him a sense of completion. But as the baby's cries of joy faded into the wind, Reyes couldn't ignore the emptiness growing in his chest. The bond he'd formed with Toro was unlike anything he had experienced before, and letting go was harder than he had anticipated. The jungle loomed behind him, its dense canopy whispering of the solitary life that awaited him. Reyes turned and began his slow walk back into the shadows, each heavy step kicking up dust as he left the open plain. The forest swallowed him once more, but this time, the silence felt heavier, the solitude more profound. As the days passed, Reyes returned to his usual routine of hunting and roaming the jungle. Yet, something had changed. The thrill of the chase no longer excited him the way it once had. His sharp senses, usually attuned to finding prey, often drifted toward the faint echoes of distant cries, as if hoping to hear Toro's voice again. The memory of the tiny Triceratops lingered, filling Reyes with an unfamiliar sense of longing. He found himself revisiting the spots they had passed through, the stream where Toro had taken his first cautious sips of water, the grove of glowing fungi where they had rested, and the clearing where they had spent their first night. Each place brought a flood of memories, and with them, a quiet ache that refused to fade. Meanwhile, life in the Triceratops herd had settled into a comforting rhythm. Toro, now safely under his mother's watchful eye, had resumed his playful explorations, though he never wandered far. The other young dinosaurs often joined him, their tiny horns clashing in mock battles as they practiced the skills they would one day need. But even in the safety of the herd, Toro couldn't forget Reyes. The towering T-Rex had been his protector, his guide through the dangers of the jungle. At night, as he curled up beside his mother, Toro would sometimes lift his head and let out a soft cry, hoping that Reyes could somehow hear him. His mother, sensing his longing, nuzzled him gently. She didn't fully understand the bond her baby had formed with the predator, but she was grateful for the T-Rex's unexpected kindness. Without Ray's, Toro might never have made it back to the herd. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Toro's cries reached a pair of sharp ears deep in the jungle. Ray's, resting in a secluded clearing, lifted his head at the familiar sound. For a moment, he was still, his golden eyes focused on the direction of the faint noise. Something stirred within him, a pull he couldn't ignore. Rising to his feet, Ray's began to move, his powerful legs carrying him toward the source of the sound. The jungle seemed to part for him, the trees and underbrush no longer obstacles but markers guiding him on his path. The herd was grazing peacefully when Toro lifted his head, his ears twitching. He sensed something approaching, though it was still far away. His tiny heart raced as he scanned the horizon, a mixture of excitement and hope bubbling within him. The adults in the herd grew alert, their heads rising in unison as they caught the scent of a predator. The large males moved to the front, their horns lowered in a defensive line, while the mothers corralled the young into the center of the group. Toro's mother called out to him, urging him to stay close. But Toro didn't feel fear. He trotted to the edge of the group, his wide eyes fixed on the distant figure emerging from the trees. It was Ray's. The herd bristled, their powerful bodies tense as the massive T-Rex approached. Some of the adults let out warning calls, their horns gleaming in the fading light. But Ray's didn't move toward them with the predatory gait of a hunter. His steps were slow, deliberate, and his head was lowered, not in submission, but in a gesture of peace. Toro let out an excited cry, breaking free from his mother's protective stance. He ran toward Ray's, his small legs carrying him across the plain. The sight of the baby running toward the predator stunned the herd, freezing them in place. Ray's stopped as Toro reached him, the tiny Triceratops nuzzling against his massive leg. The T-Rex let out a low rumble, a sound of acknowledgement and warmth. For a moment, predator and prey stood together, their bond defying the natural order of the prehistoric world. Toro's mother stepped forward cautiously, her sharp eyes watching Ray's every move. She called out to her baby, her tone firm but not angry. Toro turned to her, his cries filled with reassurance. Slowly, she approached, her massive frame moving with both caution and determination. The two locked eyes, Ray's and the matriarch. There was no aggression in his gaze, only a quiet understanding. Toro's mother let out a low rumble, a sound that was neither a challenge nor a threat. It was gratitude. She recognized the role Ray's had played in her baby's survival and acknowledged him as more than just a predator. The rest of the herd remained wary but didn't interfere as the strange reunion unfolded. They watched as Toro playfully nudged Ray's leg, his tiny tail swishing with joy. The adults seemed to sense that this was no ordinary predator, and though their instincts urged them to remain on guard, they didn't move to attack. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Ray's took a step back, his golden eyes meeting Toro's one last time. The baby let out a small cry, as if begging him to stay, but Ray's knew he couldn't remain. The jungle was his home, and the herd was Toro's. With a low, rumbling sigh, Ray's turned and began to walk away, his massive frame disappearing into the shadows. Toro watched him go, his small cries growing quieter until they faded altogether. His mother nuzzled him gently, her warmth a reminder that he was home and safe. Ray's returned to the jungle, the stars lighting his path as he moved through the dense foliage. Though he had left Toro behind, the bond they had formed remained a part of him, a memory he would carry for the rest of his days. He was no longer just a predator, driven by instinct and hunger. He had been a protector, a guide, and, in some strange way, a friend. As the jungle thrummed with the sounds of life, Ray's let out a low roar, a sound that echoed through the trees and across the plains. It was not a cry of dominance or warning, but of purpose, a declaration that even in a world of survival and savagery, compassion could exist. And somewhere on the plain, a tiny Triceratops lifted his head, his wide eyes scanning the stars as if he could feel the presence of his unlikely guardian. Though they were apart, their bond remained, a testament to the extraordinary connection that had defied the odds and changed them both forever. The night after Reyes left Toro and the herd, the jungle was unusually quiet. The distant calls of nocturnal predators seemed muffled, and the rustling of the wind through the trees carried a sense of calm. Reyes moved slowly through the underbrush, his massive form illuminated by shafts of moonlight. Though he was used to solitude, the silence felt heavier now, as if the jungle itself understood what had been left behind. He found a small clearing and settled onto the soft earth, his golden eyes scanning the star-filled sky. Memories of Toro filled his mind, the baby's tentative trust, his playful nudges, and his fearless joy when reunited with his mother. Reyes rumbled softly to himself, a sound that echoed with both pride and longing. He had done what he was meant to do, yet the emptiness in his chest lingered. Back on the plain, Toro lay nestled against his mother, his tiny breaths steady and rhythmic. But as the night deepened, he stirred. His eyes blinked open, catching the faint glow of moonlight filtering through the trees. He glanced at his mother, who slept soundly, her large frame rising and falling with each breath. Something in Toro's heart stirred, an ache, a yearning. Quietly, carefully, Toro stood and began to move. His small legs carried him toward the edge of the plain, his steps hesitant but determined. He didn't know where Reyes had gone, but a part of him believed that if he followed the jungle's whispers, he would find his protector. The jungle at night was a different world. Shadows danced among the trees, and the air was thick with the scent of damp earth. Toro moved cautiously, his wide eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. Though small and vulnerable, he felt a strange sense of courage, as if the bond he shared with Reyes gave him strength. After what felt like hours of walking, Toro paused, his tiny chest heaving. The jungle was vast, and doubt began to creep into his mind. But then, a sound reached his ears, a low, familiar rumble that sent a surge of hope through his body. Toro lifted his head, his small horns catching the moonlight, and let out a high-pitched cry. The sound echoed through the trees, carrying with it all the longing and determination of the tiny Triceratops. For a moment there was silence. Then, the underbrush ahead rustled, and a massive figure emerged. It was Reyes. Reyes froze, his golden eyes locking onto the tiny form before him. Toro let out another cry, his tail wagging slightly as he trotted forward. The sight of the baby filled Reyes with a mix of emotions: surprise, concern, and an overwhelming sense of connection. He stepped forward, his massive frame lowering as he sniffed at Toro, ensuring the baby was unharmed. Toro nuzzled against Reyes' leg, his soft cries filled with relief and joy. He had found his protector, and in that moment, the vastness of the jungle felt smaller, less intimidating. Reyes let out a low rumble, his head tilting as he gently nudged Toro back toward the plain. But Toro didn't move. He stood firm, his small legs planted as he looked up at Reyes with wide, determined eyes. The message was clear: he didn't want to go back. Not yet. Reyes sighed, his massive shoulders rising and falling. He understood the baby's desire to stay, but he also knew the dangers of the jungle. Yet, as he looked into Toro's innocent eyes, he couldn't bring himself to force the baby to leave. Instead, he nudged Toro gently, guiding him to a nearby grove where they could rest. The two settled beneath a canopy of trees, the moonlight filtering through the leaves. Toro curled up beside Reyes, his small body pressed against the T-Rex's massive side. For the first time since leaving the herd, the baby felt truly at peace. Reyes, too, felt a sense of calm he hadn't experienced in years. The bond he shared with Toro was unlike anything he had known, a connection that transcended the boundaries of predator and prey. As the stars twinkled above, Reyes let out a low, rumbling sigh, his golden eyes softening as he drifted into a rare, peaceful sleep. The following morning, the jungle awoke with the sounds of life. Birds chirped, and the rustling of leaves signaled the movement of countless creatures. Toro stretched his tiny legs, blinking sleepily as the first rays of sunlight warmed his skin. Reyes stood nearby, his imposing frame casting a long shadow over the grove. The T-Rex watched as Toro explored the grove, his curiosity reignited by the sights and sounds of the jungle. Reyes followed closely, ensuring the baby stayed out of trouble. When Toro stumbled over a root, Reyes gently nudged him back onto his feet, a soft rumble escaping his throat. As the day progressed, the two moved deeper into the jungle, their bond growing stronger with each passing moment. Reyes showed Toro how to find food, using his massive claws to unearth roots and scrape bark from trees. Toro mimicked his actions, his tiny horns brushing against the foliage as he nibbled on leaves. But Reyes knew their time together was limited. Toro belonged with his herd, where he would be safe and surrounded by his kind. The jungle, though beautiful, was no place for a baby Triceratops to grow up alone. As the sun began to set, Reyes led Toro back toward the plain, his massive footsteps creating a steady rhythm that echoed through the jungle. Toro followed reluctantly, his tiny legs dragging as he realized where they were headed. When they reached the edge of the plain, the herd was visible in the distance, grazing peacefully under the fading light. Toro's mother lifted her head, her sharp eyes locking onto her baby. She let out a low, rumbling call, urging Toro to return. The baby hesitated, his gaze shifting between his mother and Reyes. The T-Rex lowered his head, nudging Toro gently forward. This time, the baby didn't resist. Toro trotted toward the herd, his tiny cries filled with both excitement and sadness. His mother met him halfway, nuzzling him affectionately as he reached her side. The rest of the herd gathered around, their protective stances softening as they saw the baby was safe. Toro turned back one last time, his wide eyes searching for Reyes. The T-Rex stood at the edge of the plain, his golden eyes fixed on the tiny Triceratops. He let out a low rumble, a sound filled with both farewell and reassurance. The baby cried out, his voice echoing across the plain. Reyes didn't move, his massive frame silhouetted against the fading sunlight. Toro's mother nuzzled him gently, leading him back to the safety of the herd. The baby followed, though his gaze lingered on Reyes until the T-Rex was no longer visible. As night fell, Reyes turned and disappeared into the jungle, his footsteps heavy but purposeful. He carried with him the memory of the tiny Triceratops who had taught him that even in a world of survival and instinct, there was room for compassion and connection. And somewhere on the plain, beneath the watchful eyes of his mother, Toro lay gazing at the stars, a part of him always remembering the unlikely guardian who had changed his life forever.